So it turns out Undoomed is still running his same old outrage mob grift, and in this case he was going off on Twitter about kids in drag.
So when little girls are sexualized, it's harmful and scandalous, and must be stopped. But when little boys do it, it should be encouraged, celebrated, and praised in the media, huh? Yup, sounds like equality to me.
So, is he implying that the inequality here is that little girls should be celebrated and praised for this as well? Would that equality make him happy? No, of course not. He doesn't think anybody should be doing it. Because in his mind, this isn't just little boys and girls playing dress-up and flexing their artistic skills with makeup, but rather, in his own words, a scandalous sexualization. So I responded with, "Sexualized? Really, Undoomed? You saw this pic and your mind went to sex?" Now, clearly I'm ribbing him a bit in order to get him to consider the implications of his assumption, to give him an opportunity to look at it from the same angle I do, that these are just kids having fun without any regard for gender stereotypes. The parents and such celebrate it because we're coming into an era where gender norms are being outed and disregarded as the arbitrary rule sets that they are, not because they're secret pedophiles that want to sexually exploit their own children, as will be repeatedly implied by his fanbase during this discussion. Instead of reevaluating his position or taking any stock in that which I have implied, he instead plays dumb and retorts with, "No, it went to sexualized. Trouble reading?" Well, no, clearly the problem here isn't my reading comprehension, as I understood exactly what Undoomed was insinuating. He wants to pretend he doesn't understand my position, as if the semantics of changing the word sex to sexualized somehow alters the intention or implications of my tweet. It doesn't. My point still stands regardless of which word you use. There is no sexualization without reference to sex. So I replied, "Are you implying sexualization has nothing to do with sex? How very pedantic. And you see a kid cosplaying and assume it's sexualization? Again, that says more about you than them."
No.
Top-notch rebuttal.
That's all you get.
Fair enough. I've been doing this long enough to know there's no point in arguing any further than this with a grifter. It's not like I really give a shit, and he's just gonna become increasingly flippant and avoid actually answering anything. Now, the meat of this comes from his fan base, their reactionary attitudes mixed with my penchant for pointless argumentation. But before we really begin, I suppose my position needs more clarification for some of you. The issue isn't that the children are acting like adults. Children do that sort of thing all the time, and it's not really a problem. The issue is that people are interpreting it as sexualized behavior. This stems from an interpretation of evolutionary psychology often invoked by the likes of Gad Saad and Jordan Peterson. This interpretation is that pretty much everything we as a species do comes down to sexual signaling in some form. They extrapolate this and say that women's attire is meant to show off curves and hips and breasts in order to entice a mate, as does using makeup to enhance secondary sexual characteristics. The problem with that interpretation is that it doesn't take into account any outside societal or psychological factors. It's all essentialism and no constructivism. Evolutionary psychology can only theoretically answer some of the reasons behind base human activity. Society shapes our perception just as much as our nature, and we can even reshape our nature by altering our environment. So perhaps I could agree that maybe the original intention of low-cut dresses and lipstick was to accentuate secondary sexual characteristics in a specific contemporary cultural context. But these things over time have become standard female attire. Many cultures don't consider breasts to be sexual at all, and they just let their titties flop around freely. Giving them low-cut dresses or enhancing their eyes with mascara isn't going to signal anything to anyone there. So it's just a small example of how arbitrary it all is. It's only sexual if you have drank the Kool-Aid of stereotypical preconceived gender norms. Party Moth chimes in with, "The parents of the kids' minds went to sex first. Drag queens are a sexual kink. They are doing it to feel sexy. See the issue here? The kid's gay. They forced him to go ultra-mega gay for the likes." Ah yes, the old make your kid ultra-mega gay for likes scheme, as old as time. Such a lucrative scheme to run. Should also point out that being a drag queen and being gay are not intrinsically linked. I replied, "Do you know any drag queens? It's not exclusively a sexual kink. That's an assumption you've made about the motives of strangers. And what proof do you have that the parents decided and not the child? What leads you to believe it's sexual and not just cosplay?" Moon Monkey jumps in with, "Because drag is sexual in nature and he uses the term drag, not cosplay." I just finished explaining that drag is not inherently sexual, and his rebuttal is to repeat the same unsubstantiated claim that it is. And as far as I'm concerned, drag is essentially a kind of cosplay. This guy is too much. First off, he's begging the question that all drag is sexual. Secondly, Does he not realize that he's the one making the positive claim and therefore the burden of providing evidence would be solely on him? My entire point is that he does not and could not possibly know the intentions of the parents, which is an obviously true statement. The article states the exact opposite of his assumption, so he has to reject the only actual evidence in favor of his pet assumption. You can recognize something as being sexualized without actually being sexually attracted. Now, I can agree here. That is a factual statement. I'm not trying to seriously imply Undoomed is sexually attracted to these kids, but rather that his mind went to the realm of sexuality and nefarious intentions rather than anything innocent. A lot of people, like myself, see pictures like this, and we don't immediately assume there's some sexual exploitation going on. And I believe there's a reason why it's mostly cis heterosexual men that jump to that conclusion. I wouldn't bother. This guy's literally some kind of fucking retard. His entire argument is predicated on basically doing the internet where's my proof thing, that these kids' clothes and manners are, in fact, sexual provocative. Apparently women, which they are clearly imitating, aren't sexually provocative. Everyone else is the pedo for noticing it. I love that "where's my proof" line, as if requiring some sort of evidence or reasoned argument before coming to a conclusion is an unreasonable thing only internet people would do. I thought these guys were all about facts over feels. Guess that's suddenly irrelevant when something feels weird and icky to them. But in his rambling tirade, Eric here has let another shoe drop when he says, apparently women, which they're clearly imitating, aren't sexually provocative, in his sarcastic tone. That's what I mean when it's mostly dudes that assume dressing as a woman is sexual, because we exist in a culture that has commodified women as sexual objects. This guy, like most of us, can't see that we find women sexually provocative because we have a biological predisposition to do so. It is not an objective truth that women and femininity are inherently sexual. As a man raised in a Western culture, we have to acknowledge that we have a preconceived bias before you can understand where I'm coming from. This is reduced even further when you consider what I said before, that the type of clothing you find to be sexual is mostly subjective and based largely on cultural norms. They dress in a provocative way. If these were little girls in a pageant, there'd be outrage over sexualizing the little girls. It's the same thing, and both things are wrong. Little kids of all genders shouldn't be dressing like hookers. Feminine is okay, but not provocative. Provocative? Did those pictures anger or arouse you? Because they really shouldn't have. Now, when it comes to parents forcing their kids into John Benet Ramsey type pageants and shit like that, I 100% agree that shit is stupid and should be considered child abuse. But if the child genuinely wants to do it, then there is no exploitation or abuse, so there is no problem. As dumb as it is, some of these pageant kids actually want to be there. It's like a Little League baseball competition for people super into vanity instead of athletics. But that's not what drag kids are about, and that's clearly not what these people are upset about. The story in question clearly stated that the parents were appeasing the child's ambition, so unless they have some compelling evidence to suggest the article is lying about that, then they have to admit that they're engaging in wild speculation and hyperbolic exaggeration. Like when Destiny here said that they shouldn't be dressing like hookers. I mean, to me, those kids look dressed more like teenagers going to a party than a red light district window. Okay, go to a bar where a woman is dressed like the kids in the pic and tell them they look like prostitutes. See how well that goes over for you. Pageant kids dress like adults, so is all adult clothing inherently sexualized? Or is it just women's clothing? No, not all adult clothing is sexual. You know very well what I'm talking about. No little kid should dress in provocative clothing that is meant to be sexy and revealing. Boys can dress feminine and pretty without looking provocative. Seems like quite the double standard there between the sexes, and I didn't really feel like going into it with them, but this is clearly a totally subjective standard of what is too revealing. Someone from the 1900s would think everything we wear now is too revealing. So who sets the standard? Should we put women in burqas to stop the lusty gaze of men? Again, I must assert that these kids are not actually dressed provocatively. It's glamour, makeup, and dresses which are distinct from those meant to be sexy. Look at the pics again. The kids aren't wearing anything revealing, it's just feminine. I did look. The boy with the dress is dressed in a provocative dress. That's the kind of dress women wear to feel sexy, etc. I wouldn't be okay for any kid to wear that. Could you imagine that some women wear a dress to feel glamorous? That not all people in a dress like that are doing it with the intent of sexually signaling? I mean, that sort of implies a woman can't have pride in her appearance. It has to be for a man in some way. During this engagement with Undoomed's fanbase, I also tweeted this out. Imagine being intellectually dishonest enough to use semantics to imply sexualization has nothing to do with sex. Hey moron! Trouble with the context of words? I used to like Undoomed until he abandoned having cogent points and took up bullying trans people for views. When Undoomed first hit the scene, he used to tear up bad ideas and I enjoyed his content. Now he just goes after anything that will generate outrage. His valid points and observations were slowly replaced by generic insults and socio-political spin. He seems especially preoccupied with trans people and drag queens at the moment. Mr. Discordia replies with, "You mean till he criticized the group you just can't stand people criticizing? He never said it has nothing to do with sex. He said he thought the child was sexualized. To be fair, I don't think it is trouble reading, more outrage because my feeling clouding rational thought." To be fair, it has nothing to do with any specific group being criticized. It's the criticism itself that is faulty. That's what I'm pointing out. I don't care about any specific group more than any other. I just think some criticisms are more valid than others. And he's correct about outrage clouding rational thought. He's just got the wrong suspect. It's clearly Undoomed and his fan base that are all riled up about it. I'm just calmly and sarcastically pointing out that they're incorrect, because I find online debate to be amusing. I don't expect anything to come of it. Also, he 100% tried to imply that, saying that they are being sexualized isn't related to sex or thoughts about sexuality. Super dishonest. Like saying, "I'm a bigot." What? You engage in bigotry? No, I said bigot, not bigotry. Trouble reading? Horror. Wow, you're an idiot. No, he didn't. If someone else is sexualizing a kid and you point that out, doesn't mean you think about sex when you see that kid. If someone takes a banana and starts acting as if they're sucking a dick, then they're sexualizing the banana, understand? Sucking on a banana wouldn't mean anything to someone who doesn't know what a blowjob is. It is the observer that is making the association to sex. If a monkey was sucking on a banana, you wouldn't accuse the monkey of hitting on you. You'd have to acknowledge that you are the one making it sexualized in your own head. Who was sexualizing the kid? I didn't see anyone else in the pictures. Did you read something in the article about them being sexualized by anyone? Who? The parents? The kid? The people at LA Pride that you don't know, never talk to, and wouldn't know in any way? Whoever dressed them up in drag, which, on an adult, is an overtly sexualized thing. Okay, so as I pointed out, the parents don't see it as sexualization. Secondly, the clothing they are wearing in the pics is tame as fuck by today's standards and would be considered rather modest. Even if you are right and the observer sexualizes an action, having these kids dancing in adults' clubs with grown men cheering it on and throwing money is not okay. I would agree. If any of that happened. But it didn't. I don't understand why you keep adding fraudulent details to the story to bolster your own point. Are you conflating something that happened to a different drag queen to this specific case? Generalization is a fallacy. Yes, this is a different kid. But the point is, drag is overtly sexual. If a kid saw a stripper on TV and wanted to wear a stripper costume and parade around like these drag kids, the parents would say no. And you're still wrong about what Undoomed said. If Undoomed was correct, as you insist, please explain how you believe sex has no relationship to sexuality, or how something could be sexualized if you didn't know what sex was. This is a pic of Sharon Needles, a famous drag queen. Not entirely too sexual, is it? The aptly named Conservative also chimed in by saying, "I know you're fallacious, but try being logical about it. Cross-dressing children as well as making them commit exotic dances are nothing short of degenerate and sexualized behavior. Do you ignore all the registered pedophiles that love watching these kinds of children?" Before I continue his tweet, I figured I should point out that cross-dressing and drag are basically the same thing, but cross-dressing is usually a personal thing done at home and drag is for show. Also, calling people degenerate unironically has some real Nazi dog whistle vibes to it, but I'll ignore that and focus on his post hoc reasoning that pedos might enjoy it so kids shouldn't do it. Pedos go to kids' soccer games to watch the kids too, so are children's soccer leagues an issue as well? It's just backwards logic, like telling someone they can't show their bare feet because there might be a foot fetishist somewhere getting off to it. As long as pedos aren't touching or luring kids, I could care less what's going on in their heads. It's a dangerous mental disorder, but I'm not one for the idea of punishing thought crimes either. How about how these children are absolutely acting out sexually if you simply put a teenager or adult in their shoes? In no way does this magically turn into non-sexual behavior because a child is the individual that happens to be dancing sexually. It is what it is. Where in these still images did you see kids dancing sexually? And if a teen wants to wear drag, that's also fine. Makeup and a dress are not inherently sexual. A lot of drag queens play up a sexual aspect because they're adults, but a lot of them don't. It is what it is, a costume. They are all sexualized. Even the leftist media refuses to report news on these kids of events unless sexualized activity is taking place. The same goes for the audiences that come by and the crazies that bring the children to these kinds of events. They are all sexualized according to what? Your own preconceived bias? Is it possible women's attire doesn't exist solely for the sexual attraction of others? The fact you just called a bunch of people you've never met or talked to crazy reveals your bias. You can suggest, lie, deceive, and portray judgments of your poses all you like. Reality shows the light of day here. They are all sexualized as accordingly to not only their actions, but also by the encouraged personality of the audience. The fact that your people lack character, morals, and integrity, all the while illicit to this form of degenerate behavior, in no way makes the same biased. This is common amongst these types. They need to self-aggrandize and morally grandstand and call other people degenerates in order to boost their own meek self-esteem. They need to put themselves on a pedestal so that their own judgmental and authoritarian nature can be self-justified. The irony that trying to lord your character over other people is itself a sign of poor character. What audience? You're talking about a fictional scenario you've concocted in your own mind, because the pics Undoomed shared do not show an audience at all. And who are my people? Irish Canadians? We live in a world of individuals. I have no people.
You could try to claim that there's nothing sexual about drag, but drag is entirely about imitating the stereotypical physical aspects of genetic females by genetic males. To that, the secondary sexual characteristics are emphasized or imitated. That's entirely sexual.
Well, as I pointed out before, what we consider secondary sexual characteristics are determined by cultural norms, which are arbitrarily decided by the zeitgeist and are therefore fluid. I refer you to my example of how breasts are not sexual in many cultures. Same goes for using lipstick to accentuate the lips. Lips are not sexual in a lot of cultures. Such a thing would be considered purely decorative.
Do drag queens dress up like female professors or women in STEM? What about biker chicks or female MMA fighters? What about grannies with walkers and or canes? No, they imitate models, actresses, and strippers, which are all professions that are sexual in nature.
Wow, this guy is so desperate to bulwark his point, he's trying to claim that being an actress is inherently sexual. I mean, it can be if you're being used as eye candy, or if your boss is Harvey Weinstein, but certainly not inherently so. Maybe, just maybe, actresses are there to act. And there probably are biker chick or scientist or granny drag queens out there. It's a pretty wide and creative community. Many of them want to emulate things that are culturally considered feminine, but certainly not all of them. And the act of being feminine is not sexual unless you can't separate the two concepts. Some confused person jumps in and adds,
Damn, you are disingenuous as hell. Talking to him, you call it cosplay, now you're saying he's bullying trans people. So is being trans just cosplay, or are you twisting this to get Undoomed called transphobic and dogpiled?
Have you ever watched an Undoomed vid? He bullies trans people often. Also, trans and drag aren't the same, so you don't even know what you're talking about. It's being cosplay doesn't in any way negate what I said about bullying. You're not making sense.
Hey idiot, you're the one talking like they're the same thing, so now you are trying to misrepresent me as well. Yep, you are excessively disingenuous indeed.
Work on your reading comprehension. I never once said or implied that. I stopped watching Undoomed because he bullies trans. Completely different scenario from the argument we're having about drag kids. You'd be embarrassed at your misinterpretation if you had any self-awareness. Some other guy shows up and says, Diddlers should be hung by their... And he neglected to put in what? In the town square naked so people can throw rocks at them. Touching children is wrong on every level, regardless of your made-up gender term. I would agree, except for the medieval pea-brain stoning part, spoken like a real Muslim jihadist. However, nobody touched any of the kids we're talking about, so are you insane or just a liar?
Wow, I didn't know Jesus was such a disingenuous debater. Look at their clothes. Those are the clothes an adult wears in order to attract sexual attention. Putting those types of clothes on children is sexualizing those children. I didn't know that Jesse advocated pedophilia.
Look at the pics again. Those are pretty standard dresses for a night out. Dresses like that, by today's standards, wouldn't turn any heads. Just because you don't like my opinion doesn't make it disingenuous. Your assertion is disingenuous. And who the fuck is Jesse?
Okay, pedophile. Keep telling yourself that.
Defense of drag makes me a pedo? Nice try, bigot. Way to prove you're a dishonest lunatic that just makes things up in your head and then believes it. Way to destroy your own credibility.
Children don't do drag. Pedophiles dress up children. Pedophiles defend it.
Well, we found the guy who was too lazy to read the article. Clearly says it was the kid's choice after watching RuPaul. Do you have any evidence that the article is lying? If not, congratulations, you base your opinions on wild assumptions.
That's fine, pedophile. Go on believing that it is the child's choice to sexualize themselves. Whatever helps a pedophile like you keep a clean conscience.
Delusion level 100. You're claiming the guy who doesn't think a kid in a dress is sexual is a pedo. If anybody here is a pedo, it's you, mister. These kids are too sexy. So the article and the parents are lying based on nothing but your own assumption. Great logic, kid. And my buddy Jay Darkay jumps in and replies to the guy.
I think it's honestly why some people get so worked up. It's like, how dare you make these kids so sexy? Dude, no one here is looking at these kids and thinking it's sexy except you. Maybe you're the sick, perverted one.